Ayan! Kamusta kayo dyan? Ito na, makasaysayan na araw ito. For the first time, we're going live on 3 different platforms. At of course, back ulit tayo dito sa OBS para makagamit naman tayo ng mga, yung mga ebidensya natin, resibo. Ito na, hindi lang sa YouTube, hindi lang sa Facebook, pero ito na, for the very first time, live na rin po tayo dito sa TikTok. Ayan, kamusta naman yung mga kapamilya natin dyan sa TikTok? Ibang klase itong TikTok na to ha. Bakit parang mas mukhang matino ako dyan sa TikTok? Itong algorithm ng TikTok, parang Samsung ano to ha, parang Samsung camera, auto-filter niya. Di naman kailangan ng filter masyado. Medyo okay pa naman tayo. Ito mga kameta. Of course, alam natin kanina. Of course, nanood din kayo doon sa mayong vloggers natin, mga kaibigan natin. Yan sila Christian Esquera. I think he had a very interesting also episode kanina. I just saw nag-pop up lang kanina yung kanyang episode sa YouTube natin. Of course, supportive tayo and we try to make sure na we're updated with everything para sigurado rin na hindi tayo nag-overlap masyado. Sorry mga kamete kasi kakapasok lang natin, kakabalik lang natin sa dito sa Maynila. So umahabol ako sa ibang trabaho, including of course yung mga alam mo naman na academic works natin, yung mga academic duties natin. So ngayon lang ako nakahabol. So pasensya na kung konting late, but I think there's a lot that we can catch up on. And of course, dun sa mga kaibigan natin, yan, shoutout natin si Elliot. Joining us from YouTube. Ayan, dami nang join sa atin. Also dito sa TikTok, sila Drew, Eric, Irene, Clet. Ayan, maraming sumusali sa atin. So, kayo sa Facebook, ayusin na yan. Ayusin na yan sa Facebook. May ano na kayo, may competition na kayo dito sa kabila. Marami tayong mga kaibigan dyan sa different platforms. Now, marami tayong pag-usapan today, but I'll try to keep it as short as possible kasi alam ko medyo gabi na. But let's talk about a number of things. So actually, mukhang si President Marcos Jr., just as I told you guys, naalala niyo yung mga discussion natin with Ronald Llamas, parati ko sinasabi na si Marcos Jr., if it were up to him, yung instinct niya is conflict avoidance. Now, it doesn't mean that he's not gonna assert himself. It doesn't mean that he's not gonna push back. It doesn't mean that he's gonna move against his rivals. But as much as possible, he wants to avoid an all-out, direct confrontational situation. Kaya kanina, meron ng statement from, ito, naging news na ito na si Pangulo Marcos Jr. ay handa na umupo at makipag-usap kay dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte. At isa sa mga kanilang, of course, areas of focus ay yung issue ng SMNI. Of course, damay din si Digong dyan dahil may show siya dyan sa SMNI. So, apektado din siya. But alam natin mga kameta, of course, yung situation ng SMNI, hindi mo pwede hiwalay ito dun sa bigger, yung mas malaking hidwaan na nangyayari sa pagitan ng House of Duterte and House of Marcos. So, malaking bagay yan. The other thing I want to also talk about mga kameta is, in light of yung mga discussions natin last week, kasi ang usapin ngayon is anong dapat gagawin ng opposition. Yung totoong opposition. Dahil ang nangyari dito is ang Duterte camp ang nagiging opposition ngayon. Diba? Kasi silang pinakamay pag-asa in terms of challenging yung mga top bets ng administrasyon, especially dyan sa Senado. So kitang-kita natin na si Bato de la Rosa, si Bongo, even si Francis Tolentino, medyo maganda yung kanilang performance dun sa ibang surveys. At least consistently kay Bongo and Bato. But, of course, isa pang Marcos, si Amy Marcos na mas malapit sa Duterte camp in this case, at least base sa kanyang positioning and statements, among others. So, at least may 3 or 4 galing sa pro-Duterte camp na malaki ang kanilang chance, no, na makapasok sa Magic 12 in potentially yung pinaka-competitive Senate race na meron tayo in recent history. And yun yung nasa 2025, no. Pagdating sa opposition naman, halos wala sa kanila nandun sa Magic 12 in some surveys, katulad ng, I don't know, Publicus Asia or Okta. Pero dun sa Pulse Asia survey na shinare natin na hindi siya officially published pero na-leak ito, mukhang pasok si Lenny dun sa Magic 12. But si Lenny mukhang malabo kung tatakbo siya for Senate. Mukhang si Lenny, ang plano niya, dun na lang siya sa LGU level. Pero si Kiko Pangilinan at saka si Bang Makino medyo pasok din sa hindi necessarily Magic 12 pero within the range sila because of the margin of error of 3 to 5%. At dahil sobrang close yung fight from number 6 onwards, no. Yung medyo number 1, 2, 3, 4 medyo ahead sila, pero number 5, 6, 4, 7 onwards ay hindi masyadong ahead. Kung hindi ka nanonood, paki-off na lang yung TV doon para mabilis yung internet. Okay. Ito. So I think that raises some fundamental questions. Ano bang dapat gagawin ng opposition dito? Medyo mahirap yung race, and then yung mga pinaka-competitive ng potential candidates ng opposition mukhang may ibang plano. Yung iba ayaw na tumakbo sa Senado, yung iba iniisip nila kung tatakbo pa sila sa politika, so on and so forth, no? So, ang argument ko dito is one way to figure out anong dapat gagawin ng totoong opposition sa darating na election is to look at yung mga breakout stars na meron tayo over the past year or so. On one hand, para sa akin breakout star talaga si Raffy Tulfo, hindi necessarily dahil sa kanyang ranking dun sa last year's 2022 elections, because actually he was expected to top it, and then si Robin Padilla pa yung nakatop, no. Nevertheless, of course, expected na pag Tulfo mataas talaga maging ranking yan because of the Tulfo brand and the appeal it has, which we'll discuss more later on. But I think what makes Raffy Tulfo's case quite interesting is bentang-benta rin siya dun sa mga tao na hindi believe sa mga Tulfos or medyo ayaw or critical sa mga Tulfos. I would say even personally, I used to be more critical of the Tulfos. But when I started paying attention, especially dito sa policy positioning ni Raffy Tulfo, especially sa issue like China, sa national security, critical infrastructure, among others, not to mention yung kanyang, yung mga sinabi na sa land grabbing, etc. Parang in fairness naman, mukhang maganda, mukhang matino yung kanyang positioning. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean na I'm going to take back some of the criticism I've made of the so-called Tulfo brand of justice. At of course, I think pati sila na maaminado naman sila na minsan medyo hindi sila ganun ka-exactly tama doon sa kanilang mga ginagawa. I mean, mahabang usapan yan, but you know the context of the conversation. You can also check, of course, yung interview natin with Senator Raffy Tulfo, available on YouTube yan, and I also posted snippets of that. But I think the other interesting case, I mean, she's not running for Senate at mukhang medyo mahirapan siya kung she runs for Senate in the near future. But I think Representative Franz Castro is another interesting case of someone who's not a liberal. She's not your standard liberal Democrat or liberal candidate. But I think she has done a very, very good job of becoming more and more a mainstream political figure. Almost a household name, right? Malaking bagay yan considering where she started before the 2022 elections. Almost hindi natin siya kilala kasi mas kilala pa natin yung mga ibang mga progressives, mga leftists na mga tao, sila Teddy Casino for instance, Liza Masa, etc. Si Nery Colmenares, of course, na tumakbo para sa Senado on multiple occasions. So I think she has done very good considering from where she started. Now, obviously, she has to push closer to the ceiling. But I think in terms of yung floor starting point na, she has done very well. That's why for me, siya yung pinaka-breakout star of last year considering from where she started. Although, ultimately, ang argument ko dito is Riza Hontiveros still remains as the most successful model of how the opposition should move forward. Essentially, bringing political appeal and electoral acumen on one hand, at saka yung kanyang conviction politics. Mahalaga yan. Now, let's first start with President Marcos Jr. and Rodrigo Duterte. So essentially, two parts tayo today pagdating sa discussion. I just felt this is also, kaysa artificially slice ko throughout the days kasi some other developments can come out. Sometimes ito yung pwede natin gawin sa mga live natin. We can discuss two issues na relatively related to each other, or yung mga kasama natin dyan, pwede naman nila tingnan nila yung iba't ibang parte ng mga analysis natin dun sa ating mga platforms. Ayan, yung mga nagtatroll sa atin sa TikTok, umayos naman kayo. Hindi obra yan. Yung 6 years nga nasa power kayo, ang dami nagtatroll sa akin, hindi gumana yan. Tapos gusto nyo, sa tingin nyo ngayon gagana yan. Anyways, thank you sa engagement. Balikan natin ito. Okay. Alright. Sinasabi ko lang, don't even try. Alright? Sayang yung energy mo. Okay. Ito. Unang-una pag-usapan natin yung kaso hindi man kaso, yung seeming makeup, no, ng dalawang higanteng dynasties or political forces in the country, no. I don't want to say dynasty per se kasi yung kapatid ng isa medyo nandun sa kabila. But anyway, mamaya na tayo pupunta dyan. Okay. So, si President Marcos Jr., sinabi niya na he's always available to meet President Duterte para pag-usapan yung mga issues of concern, yung mga yung mga hidwaan nila, of course hindi na amin ni President Marcos Jr. na talaga may hidwaan sa pagitan ng administrasyon at saka mga Dutertes, because at least yung kanyang position is he's still number one fan of Sara Duterte and everything is fine and dandy, which we know of course is not the case. So may report yung Bloomberg News kanina na republish dito sa South China Imports. Basahin natin mga kameta. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has offered to meet with former leader Rodrigo Duterte amid rumors of a brewing destabilization being linked to his predecessor. Of course, itong destabilization plot, ito po yung sinasabi na may mga retired generals or officials or mga sundalo na nag-withdraw daw ng support kay President Marcos Jr. At of course, that automatically raises eyebrows and concerns and makes some people wonder kung ano bang mangyari dito. Ang mangyari ba dito is coup d'etat or something like that, no? And considering there were multiple persons in the defense establishment who were not naman purged but that were pushed out. You were talking about the first National Security Advisor of Marcos Jr., talking about the AFP chief when Marcos in the first 6 months of Marcos. You were talking about the defense secretary, the first defense secretary that Marcos Jr. had, and then you can talk about many people dun sa NTF-ELCAC na retaggers na tanggal. So it's not like concerns or rumors of yung mga fissures or tensions sa defense establishment na is anything new, no? Alam natin na noon pa lang, especially in early 2022, may mga concerns na doon sa stability ng civil-military relations. So, yung tinatawag na civil-military relations, ito yung relasyon ng Pangulo at saka yung Sandatang Lakas at saka yung mga defense establishment. But, ako, personally, skeptical ako because katulad ng pinag-usapan natin Ronald Llamas dun sa isang episode natin, mukhang malabo na any of the relevant generals who are actually serving right now are sympathetic to calls for destabilization or anything like that, and honestly, for retired people to withdraw their support like as if they matter, right? Or in this case, questionable kung yung mga nagwi-withdraw ng support ay people who actually matter in terms of having influence dun sa mga tao na nandun sa loob ng Sandatang Lakas, no? So parang more rumors ito, more lang yan, pa-effect lang yan kaysa real threat to President Marcos Jr. But of course, President Marcos Jr. being President Marcos Jr., you have to make sure you keep things on an even keel, no? So kaya siguro ito yung konteksto kung saan sinabi ni President Marcos Jr. na wala naman tayong problema dito, lahat pwede natin pag-usapan. So ayon kay President Marcos, he is, quote, always available to meet with Duterte. Ito ayon sa kanyang communication secretary si Jeloy Garafil. At at pwede rin nila pag-usapan itong issue ng SMNI, no? Itong issue ng SMNI dahil of course alam nyo, suspended ang SMNI for 1 month beginning from, was it 2 weeks ago? Yeah. And damay rin yung show ni Digong, although yung show ni Digong separately was also facing suspension dahil sa kanyang incendiary remarks, including yung mga kanyang alleged death threats laban sa isang sitting member of the Congress, which whom we mentioned a while ago, of course, si Franz Castro, no? So as you can see, ito yung sinasabi ko parate. If you look at President Marcos Jr., parate ang gagawin niya is he will try to bring down tensions. Parate ang gusto niya is bring down the fuego, no? Dahil very, very conflict avoidant siya. And some would argue even risk averse, no? At ito nga sabi niya, if he wants a meeting, sabi ni Marcos Jr., open siya, bukas siya to have that kind of discussion, no? So ito yung officially statement galing sa Malacanang. President Marcos is always available to President Duterte. The President will contact him now to ask if he wants a meeting. Alright? Siyempre, alam niyo naman, nagdrama si President Duterte also over the weekend. May mga sinabi siya pa siya ukol sa, among other things, dun sa issue ng SMNI. Sabi niya, my only concern is to help my friends, si Pastor, because the NTC has not even come with an allegation or charge of my wrongdoing. Sunshine SMNI has always been careful. Why is this happening? Medyo nagwala si President Duterte over the weekend. I'm just biding my time. One of these days, I will come up with a statement not necessarily defending kanyang kaibigan, but just to say something about the way things are. Medyo malabo yun kasi ang dami nang sinabi, hindi ko parati nagrereklamo. So I don't know anong biding my time ang sinasabi niya kasi parati naman siya nagrereklamo sa EDCA, dun sa confidential fund na anak niya na tinanggalan. Sabi ni Digong, I'll just refer to my show because that's what is important to me. Kasi sabi ko, suspended din yung show niya. Sabi ni Digong also, sabi niya, dininay din niya na may secret meeting daw with military and police official in Davao City for any potential destabilization. Sabi niya, who would believe me? What police or military officer is crazy enough to meet with me? Well, I don't know. That must be crazy. I'm already retired and poor. Well, retired? I'm not sure. How is he retired? Poor? Definitely not. Okay. Sabi niya, yung mga nagsasabi na may destabilization plot, sabi niya, ito yung insecurity nila maybe, it's all in their mind. Wala namang daw nangyari. Sabi niya, last year, Duterte said in his program that he remembered talking to some retired generals but emphasized to them that as long as there is no serious issue of corruption, wala dapat problema. So he also wondered how I was dragged into this talk of destabilization. Alright? So, and then dun naman kay Sara Duterte, sabi niya, well, I cannot be active participant in politics. All politics, she has to be on her own. So, he's also, pushing back against allegations na pinupush niya anak niya to be more active or sulsulero. He's pushing back against all of that. Sabi niya, ukol kay Marcos Jr., Marcos is quite careful. I really do not know anything. I'm outside Malacanang. I don't have any contacts anymore since I retired. I do not bother to ask questions as to what I see is what I get. Now, if you read through all of this, parang dating niya sa akin is, over the weekend, si Digong ay medyo how should I put it? Raising the white flag, or at the very least parang sinasabi ni Digong na medyo cool down lang tayo. Alright. So maybe that's his way of de-escalating tensions. Maybe that's his way of magpa-lambing ng konti. Alright. Maybe that's his way of saying, ayaw natin ng away, civil war, all the way ganon. Maybe it's also his way of playing safe. Dahil hindi po biro ang mga accusations ng destabilization ng mga others, no? At of course, mukhang nagets din niya na palaban si Marcos, nagets din niya na palaban yung kampo nila, nagets din niya na silang malakas kasi siya yung presidente, right? Yung House leadership also with the president, etc. So, maybe this is Digong's way of trying to bring down tensions and also to make sure na hindi madama yung kanyang anak, who's the number 2 in the country, dito sa mga nangyari dito. Alright? So kita mo na medyo worried din si Presidente. May mga sinabi din siya about, religious matters that I'd rather not go to. Alam niyo naman mga kameta, sensitive ako sa mga itong issue. I'd rather not get into it. Whether he was serious or he was joking, I'd rather not make a comment on it. But overall, yes, katulad ng tamang sinabi ni PH Review, mga others, mukhang medyo, I won't say kabado, pero medyo mukhang concerned din si Pangulong Duterte. So, maybe nagkaroon siya ng reflections over Christmas, over holidays. Sabi ko nga, that's the time for some reflection for all of us, including yours truly. At siguro naisip niya na they have to shift gears downwards, hindi upwards. Medyo nag-sports mode kasi si Digong eh. Lalo after yung EDCA, Diyos ko, sabi niya ang Pilipinas maging graveyard of nuclear power, etc. Tapos mamaya pumunta pa siya sa Japan without any coordination. And mamaya sinabi niya rotten yung Congress, ganun. So siguro, hindi ko naman sinabi na tauhan, pero mukhang nagets niya na, the balance of power is very much skewed. Not in his favor. So siguro ito yung at least temporary recalibration. And as far as President Marcos Jr. is concerned, time is on his side, no? It's very likely that the Marcos camp will do very well in the 2025 elections, just as Digong's camp did very well in 2019 elections, just as Aquino's camp did very well in 2013 elections. Most of the time, probably with the exception of the Arroyo era in 2007 elections, usually, more than usual actually, sobrang lakas at maganda yung performance ng isang incumbent administration sa midterm elections. So kung ikaw si Bongbong Marcos, you'd rather not a pick fight right now, cruise through 2025 elections, and then from a position of even greater strength, potentially even push for constitutional change. No? At yun yung parating ng sinasabi. In fact, this is very interesting. Because si Paulo Marcos Jr., in 2014 and 15, when he was a senator pa, sabi niya, kung gusto mong magbago ng saligang batas, gawin mo habang maaga pa. And then he also ran on the federal party platform nung tumakbo siya bilang presidente. But once he won power, medyo nag-tone down siya. And in fact, he didn't even mention federalism at all dun sa kanyang first and even second State of the Nation address. Because katulad ng sinabi niya during the election time, parang medyo malabo ito, wala naman clamor. At alam niya, dahil dun sa reputation niyang kanang ama, yung ginawa ng kanang ama, ginamit niya yung constitutional change for autogolpe, yung tawag dyan, to essentially introduce a whole new regime, personalistic regime / dictatorship. Alam din niya na medyo controversial for Marcos Jr. to talk about constitutional change. But I think now, nakikita natin, iba na yung inip ng hangin eh. Medyo komportable na siya to talk about constitutional change, because it looks like there is really a plan for constitutional change after all, changing the so-called Aquino Constitution. At least that's how the pro-Marcos camp puts it. So interestingly, if you look at it, earlier this year, dun sa isang meeting with the Federalist Party, etc., ang sinabi ni President Marcos Jr., sabi niya, we're already doing the first step of federal government in the Philippines because he's already pushing for some forms of devolution. Pero ang suspecha ko dito, hindi lang federalism. Actually, maybe federalism is not even the primary target of constitutional change. I think more parliamentary. Because alam natin, in the parliamentary system, mas madali na ipapanalo mo isang tao na malapit sa'yo na not necessarily ganun ka-charismatic as long as meron kang malaking party base, no? So you can become a prime minister as long as you have the biggest party in the parliament, or you can form the biggest coalition in the parliament, no? Whether majority or supermajority or the biggest plurality, no? So I think parliamentary could be a target here if they push for constitutional change. Maybe may pagka-federalism just to also win over, I don't know, people like Robin Hood Padilla, among others. And very interestingly, nakita natin na yung isa sa mga tao na who will be very crucial in overseeing a constitutional change, ito yung si Martin Romualdez, also said na this year, sa kasalukuyan na taon, magiging priority na talaga itong charter change. In fact, parang nire-rush na daw nila yan dahil mahalaga ito para sa ating bansa. Now, we had a lot of conversation about my misgivings about all these arguments that constitutional change will automatically solve all the problems, because there are many explanations for national success. A communist country like China and Vietnam can be successful. Non-communist countries like South Korea can be successful. Parliamentary non-presidential systems can be successful. So there are many factors that explain success, economic success especially, including trade and industry, especially trade and industrial policy, I would argue. But we had separate vlogs on that, pwede natin pag-usapan later on. So ito so si Speaker Romualdez, sabi niya na House Bill number 7352, enabling measure for resolution of both houses, number 6, or the resolution calling for constitutional convention, so CONCON, garnered 301 affirmative votes with only 7 lawmakers voting against it. So overwhelming. So yes, the 301 House members who co-authored the twin resolutions are in a rush to amend these restrictive provisions of the Constitution, referring dun sa restrictions on investment, etc. So essentially, ang peg dito is kailangan natin yan for economic blah blah blah, right? Although, as I said, there are many ways to get the economics right, including, bring down corruption, which you don't necessarily need to just change the form of government or constitution. You can do it with the existing laws. There should be commitment to that, and there should be necessary reforms in that regard. And in terms of if it's just about economics, well, actually nakapasa tayo ng new economic laws nung last year, in 2022, under the previous Senate and Congress. Yung IRR lang kasi hindi pa na finalize on time, kaya medyo delayed yung implementation. So actually, we have to wait before we can say, bakit ka mag-invent, ba't ka kukuha ng bagong kotse kung yung kotse na binili mo lang isang araw ay hindi mo pa nagamit? Parang ganun yung argument nun, di ba? So there's some debate around that at yun yung pushback ng Senate. But who knows after 2025, especially if many pro-Marcos people win in the Senate, the balance in the Senate shifts, etc., then we can really talk about it. And as I said, if we go parliamentary especially, it's very easy. It's much easier for Marcos Jr. to engineer a political succession that makes sure he's safe. Because tingnan natin, lahat ng mga ex-presidents sa Pilipinas, they didn't have a good retirement or semi-retirement. Look at anong nangyari kay Aquino nung wala na siya sa pwesto. Look at Arroyo. Look at Erap. Well, Erap case, alam natin. Look at Digong right now. Probably si Ramos lang hindi masyado. Right? I would say Ramos is probably the only ex-president, and to Sergio Corazon Aquino didn't face as much harassment from their successors, but practically after all the next 4 or 5, they didn't have very good retirement time. So if you're BBM, you also want to make sure that after you step down from office in 2028 or whatever it is, you have a successor you can trust, right? And look at, so that's what I'm saying, right? And so there's a very high probability that there will be even more concerted bicameral, hindi lang sa Kongreso, pero pati sa Senado, push for some sort of constitutional change after 2025 elections. So lots is happening, mga kameta. And these are issues that we'll continue to cover in the coming months and year or so as nag-gain ng momentum yan. Now, interestingly, because there's still opposition in the Senate, and that opposition may even hold after 2025 elections, just to play safe, mukhang ang plano dito is to push also for a people's initiative. So sa ilalim ng isang people's initiative, you can more or less circumvent opposition potentially from Senate kasi kailangan mo ng super majority sa Senate or 3/4 ba to approve constitutional change. So you may be able to actually circumvent that through so-called people's initiative. Again, we can have a different vlog on that, pag-usapan natin yan. So in short, the clouds are gathering. The clouds of constitutional change are gathering. So time is actually on BBM's side. While if you're the Duterte camp, pumili ka. Are you gonna accept a subordinate position? Are you gonna go into full-on opposition? And then there's a wild card of the ICC. Because the ICC may issue a warrant of arrest sometime this year with or without the cooperation of the Marcos Jr. administration. And then the next question will be, what will the Marcos Jr. administration do? Right? There's a risk if this comes before elections, because this could allow yung Duterte camp to mobilize their people, etc. But this could be also a way to completely marginalize any potential rival for 2025 and railroad the way all the way through and push for constitutional change. All right, we'll keep it there. Thank you very much for discussion on this part. I hope you appreciated the discussion because I'm showing to you in 360 degrees. There's so many aspects to this. At ang daming mga variables na dapat titignan ni Marcos Jr. on this issue. But in the meantime, it looks like both sides are in kind of a detente mode, if not a rapprochement mode. Medyo parang cool off muna dun sa tensions. But as I said, if you look at time, it's really on BBM side. And whether the other side is just gonna sit back and take it, I have my doubts about it. All right. Okay, now let's go to the next part because I think this is very important. Again, nakita ko na over the weekend, yan naman yung mga pa-analyst dyan na biglang, opposition, helpless case sa Senado, so wag na kayo tumakbo, wag na kayo mag-ambisyon, wag niyo salangin pera nyo, focus na lang kayo sa LGU level. Well, let me say, first of all, actually hindi madaling LGU level. Minsan mas mahirap pa yung LGU level. Because pagdating sa Senado, minsan name recognition pa lang pwede na. I mean, I'll just give you a good example. I mean, Lito Lapid, for instance. I think he tried to run for LGU position sa Pampanga. I'm not sure he was very successful. For Senate, I don't think he even campaigned. I mean, basta yung movie lang niya, ang probinsyano, yun na yan. Kailangan, basta name recall lang, boom, pasok siya, diba? So actually, minsan mas mahirap yung LGU level kasi ang kabangga mo dyan, yung napakalakas na dynasty nandun. And you need massive machinery, if not guns, among others.